Last week, I ran the Marine Corps Historic Half Marathon and set a PR in the half with a 1:22:56. So today, I want to do a quick recap of that race, going over the different aspects of my race performance, as well as doing a course overview of the Historic Half. So let's get to it. So we'll start in the Koros Training Hub, going over some of the numbers to my performance for the Historic Half. As you can see, I ran with the Koros Pace 3 watch, the heart rate monitor, and the Pod 2. So all the metrics for this run are based on these three pieces of gear. And as you can see, the watch recorded a distance of 13.22 miles, a total activity time of 1:22:58, a total time of 1:22:58. I did an average pace of a 6:17 mile with a best mile of 5:56, an average heart rate of 180, which if you actually look at my heart rate throughout, you can see it stayed pretty steady throughout the entire race. I never really had any moment of like the heart rate going too high or really dropping too low in terms of like going up a hill or down a hill. Average power 345 watts, average cadence 186. There was a total elevation gain of 597 feet for the Historic Half and a total descent of 623 feet. The effort pace, which this is really interesting when it comes to running the Fredericksburg Marathon or the Historic Half Marathon. So the way effort pace works is it's an algorithm that were to guess how you would run had the course been more of a flat course and not so hilly. And Koros believes I would have run roughly a 6:10 pace for the half marathon. And then the training focus was a threshold. My running performance was a 109%, so excellent, which is always good when you're trying to set a PR in a race. My aerobic training effect was a 4.2, so optimized. And then my anaerobic training effect was a 4.9, so that was also optimized. Those numbers are really good to see in terms of how I performed for this race, considering how hard this race course was and the fact that I was trying to set a PR in the half marathon. So I knew this effort was going to be hard from the beginning of the race to the end. So it's good to see that at least I ran the race well, or at least Koros believes I ran the race well. Next, we'll look really quick at time in zones. So we'll start with pace zones. As you can see, a majority of my pace zone was threshold, which is why this was a focus on threshold for the workout. So 49%. And then anaerobic endurance, which is that 536 to 606, 28:13, so 34%. I would say a lot of this was most likely more in the beginning of the marathon. I would say the first half hour roughly is where we ran closer to that sub 120 pace, so like a 6:05, 6:10 pace. And then as I slowly moved into the further parts of the race is when I moved more into this threshold. And then aerobic power, there were a few moments where I spent, as you can see, 7 minutes and 29 seconds. So there were quite a few minutes where I spent closer to that like 640 to 650. And then aerobic endurance, 712 to 836. 441. This was most likely on Hospital Hill. I wasn't paying attention to my watch, so I wouldn't have seen these paces, but I guarantee you most of this was on Hospital Hill. And then you have this anaerobic power, so 536, a minute 24. That was roughly the end of the race where I was really pushing. So from 20K on, I really tried to kind of turn it up as much as I could for how fatigued I was. And that's where this anaerobic power comes in. Next, we'll look at the heart rate zone. As you can see, again, in that 181 to 190, so the anaerobic endurance, I spent 50% of my time in the race in this heart rate zone. I will say there was a lot of times where I was looking at my watch throughout the race and noticing that my heart rate was in the 180s, but it wasn't too troubling because usually with a half marathon effort, you're looking at going at or around threshold anyways. So I knew that with how hilly this course was, my heart rate was going to spike. The main thing I kind of tried to keep focusing on was, did my heart rate drop back down to like a reasonable like 178, 180 when I was getting into the flats or going downhill. So that was another thing I was really focusing on, which as you can see, 44% was in that 174 to 180. So again, the majority of my heart rate was floating, I would say in like that 174 to like 185, maybe. It never got close to 190 as far as I know, but it really hovered for a majority of the race right in that threshold to just above threshold for my heart rate. And so with my race by the numbers out of the way, I'm actually gonna hop into Strava really quick so we can do a course overview as well as I can break down the race mile by mile to go over how I was feeling and what to expect if you plan on running the historic half in the future. All right, so as you can see, the start and finish of the historic half are in the same place. So you finish where you start the race. And as you can see, you kind of have a slight uphill on the start of the race. So the way the race starts is, they have the wheelchairs go. I believe that it was like 5:58. There was a 6 o'clock gun start for the general public of running the race. Wheelchairs, if I remember correctly, went at 5:58. And so if you watch the vlog, you'll see a lot of the Ainsley's Angels team really showed up for this race. I was a seated runner, and the way seated runners work, at least for the male category, is if you submit a halftime that is 1:25 or better. So an official halftime from a previous race, if it's 1:25 or better, you get a seated runner bib. Honestly, there wasn't much to being a seated runner. Like, I didn't get preferential wave or anything like that. There wasn't like a special tent that I could see in the morning. And so I was at the start of the race, like at the very beginning of the crowd. So crossing the line from the gun start was, I think, only 2 to 5 seconds off. So the way they start the race, they have these cannons, so some artillery cannons that shoot off for the gun start. And then you go and you're running through the smoke. It's a pretty robust and kind of fun start. It's a unique start, that's for sure, to a race. And like I said, you can see that the course has a slight elevation up, but it's nothing crazy. And especially you're at the beginning of the race, so you're gonna be the freshest you're gonna be. As I said, you go up this hill and then you kind of have a slight downhill, which is nice, until you make a left-hand turn, and then you have your first big hill. So through here, you're actually running past, if you watch the vlog, where the fire trucks have the giant US flag, that's right through here. But like I said, you come to your first hill, which isn't too bad. You're basically just going over the overpass at Cowan. So you go over an overpass, and then that's when you hit mile 1. As you can see, my pace was a 5:44 hitting mile 1. Throughout, I had a pretty fast pace coming out. I went pretty hot, and I would say it's kind of hard being up with a lot of the seated and fast runners, because everyone went, and I knew I wanted to settle into a 6:20 pace. So I was shooting for a sub 123. I wanted to go out at a 6:20 pace. I had trained for a 6:05, so a sub 120, but just based on certain indicators prior to this race, I thought a 123 would be the smarter choice because of how many hills there were and the chance that it might be really humid. And so I was planning on a 6:20, and as you can see through mile 1, that did not happen. And then it was about mile 1-ish, so when I got over this overpass, there were 2 all-marine runners ahead of me that I kept thinking, I just want to catch these 2 runners, and then I'll lock in with them, because they look like they're running about the same pace I am, and we'll lock in and I can just go with them and just kind of go with it. I've trained for a 6:05. I'm running a 6:05 roughly. And so I'll just hold it and kind of let the cards fall as they may. If it bites me later when I hit Hospital Hill, then it bites me. But right now I feel good. And so it was roughly at mile 1, somewhere in here, that I was actually able to catch those all-marine runners. So you get this nice downhill on the backside of that overpass for Cowan. And then you kind of have some small rollers, and then you get another nice downhill going into mile 2. And so you can see my paces are pretty hot again. But again, you have that ability of the downhill. If you were to look at Coros, my effort pace would probably be slower than this because of the downhill. So we had a really nice downhill, and then you turn into this neighborhood, and this is where you get your first serious hill in the historic half. And it's definitely, it's expected because you can see it in the elevation chart, but I didn't realize how steep and big it was actually going to be. You hear a lot of people say oh, beware, there's a hill in the neighborhood. And to be honest, because of Hospital Hill, actually, I will say most of the race course, because of Hospital Hill, I kind of ignored the fact that this was actually a pretty hilly course throughout. And I only thought really about Hospital Hill. That was a mistake on my part, because I really underestimated how much or how taxing the race course would be leading up to Hospital Hill, especially running at that PR effort. So this hill was pretty rough. As you can see, my pace quickly slowed down. You can see right there's a 7:10. So I really slowed the pace, but again, I was still locked in with the all-marine runners. And then you make a turn out of the neighborhood. So you basically go up this hill, and it kind of does an S as you can see here. And then once you reach the top, you kind of like make that turn and you reach the top. And then there's like a little straightaway, and then you turn and you go down this really steep downhill, which is really nice because it's probably one of the only times in the race where you hit like a steeper uphill and you actually get like a comparative downhill on the backside. Most of the race, you don't get that. So this was really nice and welcoming. It allowed us to kind of lock back in and get that fast pace. You hit mile 3 and then you kind of come through, as you can see, this like overpass. So right before you run under the overpass, you hit the 5K marker. We came through the 5K at, I believe, 19:01 or 19 minutes flat. So running a pretty solid race at this point, still holding for that sub 120. As you can see, then you get another hill. So you come down this downhill, you get another hill. There is a medical tent and a water station here. And then you get to the top and you start to go through, as you can see, Maria's Heights. You get another nice downhill as you come into what will be, I would argue, probably the flattest part of the course, or what felt like the flattest part of the course. Because as you can see throughout with this elevation, the course is definitely a hilly course throughout. There really is no long stretch of flat that you get, but I did feel like when you make this turn going into mile 4 to 5, this stretch that you can see with the blue dot moving along, I would say this stretch was the best stretch of the course in terms of just kind of being able to lock into a specific pace. It being flat, you just are able to lock in and kind of turn the miles over, or at least turn the legs over. And one quick thing I do want to note before I get too far into this, because I forgot, in terms of water stations, I don't really remember where the water stations were, and that's because I actually took no water during this race. I had not trained at all with taking water, and so the last thing I wanted to do was start doing something on race day that I had really never done before. So the whole PR attempt, I took absolutely no water. I just had 2 gels with me. The plan was to take a gel at the 30-minute and then a gel at the 1 hour mark. So somewhere in here, as you can see, yeah, right about here was where I took gel 1. But as you can see, you go down and you start to head, kind of, you do this like switchback zigzag towards downtown Fredericksburg. And then you make the turn going again. Like I said, you're kind of switchbacking through here. You have a slight uphill in that turn. And then you have this kind of like overarching, like up, flat, down, as you then head straight into downtown Fredericksburg. Again, just rolling hills throughout as you're going into downtown. And I was trying really hard to just kind of stay locked in to my pace, because as you can see, I'm still holding, like, our pace was slowing slightly, but we were still close enough that it was like, I don't know, maybe I'll get like a 121. Like, that was the thought that was running through my head at this portion of the race, was like, we still got some time, so a lot can happen, and a Hospital Hill is in the distance. Like, that's always in the back of my head through this whole race. It was like, I feel really good. Through all of this, I was like, man, I feel good. Sub 120 could happen. 121 maybe. Like, maybe I'll be closer to the 120 than I thought. Because like I said, at the beginning of the race, because of some workouts prior, I had thought 123 was the wiser option. And then I went out at a 120 and I was feeling good. All the way up into like 45, 50 minutes. Like, I was feeling like, okay, maybe I'll be closer to 120 than I thought based on those workouts. And so I wasn't really paying attention too much. Plus, it all kind of looked the same. You know, you're just going through these random neighborhoods that you don't really know. One other thing I will say really quick, just as like a caveat for anyone who's looking to run this in the future, when you look at the race map on the Marine Corps Marathon website, you see like, oh, cool, I'll be running through downtown Fredericksburg. Like, there's going to be some great crowd support. You know, this is a perfect time to lift me up. You know, I'm at mile 8 going into what will be the hardest part of the race. And so it'll be great to have some crowd support. I don't know if it was just this year or if it's like this every year, but there was really no crowd support through the entire race. You'd get like pockets of like a couple people, like 4 to 5 people out here and there who were cheering you on. But the one thing that I will say like mentally kind of messed with me, especially as, you know, we're in the later miles of the race, I'm getting fatigued and I know Hospital Hill is coming, is that there wasn't the crowd support I was expecting through downtown Fredericksburg. And so that definitely played a factor in the mental aspect. And if you're someone who's going to run the historic half in the future, just be aware it could be really lonely. Like, luckily I had Ben, but if I had not had Ben, I may have missed my PR altogether, because like I said, it was just, it's really quiet. You're alone with your thoughts. You're rocking all these rolling hills and you're just slowly getting fatigued. And in the back of your head, all you can think about is this hill is coming. And so it can be really hard. And like I said, so it's really quiet. There's not really much crowd support. So just be aware of that if you are going to run the historic half in the future, that there's a chance that could happen. And so then you run along the river for a little bit, which is pretty cool. It's really beautiful. And then somewhere in here, I can't remember exactly where, I did film it, but I wasn't paying attention completely like what mile it was. And I'll explain why in a minute. Somewhere in here is what's called the Blue Mile, if I remember correctly. And so it's like Run to Remember. I think the organization's called the Blue Mile, Run to Remember. And basically it's a mile stretch, I believe, of pictures of service members who have passed away. I'm not sure if they've fallen in combat or like what the story is to each service member, but they have them like back to back to back all along the right hand side running up. And then there's also runners who are running with this organization, so they wear blue. They wear like a blue shirt, which is that again to signify like you're running to remember somebody. But either way, there's service members throughout the entire mile, and then at the end of the mile there's a bunch of people on that same right hand side holding American flags, cheering you on, which is really cool to see. I will say running that mile, if you're gonna race this race, it's a pretty heavy mile just because it's kind of overwhelming to see all those faces back to back to back. And then another reason I wasn't really paying attention through here was because I had a technical issue with my GoPro. Now this is obviously gonna be unique to me. It's not like everyone's running with a GoPro, but I did not realize that when I was filming, I was running out of storage space. And so I went to film and for some reason I thought, cause like I never pay attention. There's like some numbers on the top that show you how much footage you have left for your memory card. And I saw like 7:15 and I thought, okay, cool. I have like 7 hours, 15 minutes. And then I clicked just to start recording the Blue Mile and realized that the 15 was seconds. And so it was counting down seconds and I was like, oh no, I have 7 minutes left of footage and I still have like all of Hospital Hill, which I plan to record like the whole hill. And then I usually record like the entire last mile I run. And so I knew there was going to be some long stretches of footage where like I'm going to have like 5 minutes of footage that might not all be usable, but I'm filming all of Hospital Hill. And so I'm running through here, and as you can see, my pace did slow a little bit. I was literally running and had my GoPro and was deleting old footage as I was going through. So basically this whole part of the race is like I barely remember. And so I would be deleting footage, and then like as you can see here, you make a turn and you kind of like go really quickly. It almost felt like downhill, but you go and then you kind of turn around. So they have like a cone and a Marines there to like help navigate that part of the course. And so like I noticed that was coming up, so I like stopped deleting footage and like recorded to catch this really quick. And so like this part's in the vlog, but honestly all of this kind of a blur to me because I was deleting footage while trying to race. So unfortunately I missed probably the most beautiful part of the river because I was paying attention to my GoPro, and that's definitely a lesson learned. But either way, you make a 180 and then you come back up, and you'll notice in my footage that when you're going on Fall Hill, there's kind of like a slight hill you go up here. Like you can kind of see here, you go up this like slight hill as you're going up Fall Hill. I will say one more thing before I get into Hospital Hill is that somewhere in here, I also realized that like I no longer had it for the 120. Like I was losing my pace pretty quickly. I realized at this point, it was roughly the 15K and beyond where like, okay, I don't have it. I might not PR this race. My mindset had to switch from I may no longer PR to how high can I place for this race? Maybe I can place in my age group. Maybe I can get in the top 20. I wasn't sure how many runners were ahead of me. And so my mindset switched to the next person I saw in front of me. It's like, it was just chase them down and try and pass them. And maybe that gets me one spot closer to being in the top 20. And maybe it gets me one spot closer to placing in my age group. So like I said, right here was where that mindset kind of shifted. And then you go in, you make that left-hand turn. There's a water station right here, right before Hospital Hill. And again, you have this like little uphill. It kind of flattens out. You get maybe a little downhill before you turn into Hospital Hill. And then by this point, I was completely spent. There was a runner in red ahead of me. He basically just held the same distance throughout Hospital Hill, which was a real bummer, but it also helped push me on Hospital Hill because I kept thinking maybe I can catch him, or I can catch him on the top of the hill. But you take a right-hand turn into Hospital Hill and it almost immediately starts. Like you just immediately are going up this super steep hill. You can also notice the blue line here is my pace, how much it drops. They also had someone taking pictures because obviously Hospital Hill is like a big part of the marketing for this race. So they had a photographer at the bottom, they had a photographer in the middle, and then they had a photographer at the top. So just be aware, when you're running Hospital Hill, even though you're dying, try and look good because they're going to take a lot of pictures of you on Hospital Hill. As I said, you hit mile 11 and the photographer's like right before mile 11, that mid photographer. And then you keep going. And Hospital Hill is one of those hills that like you're going and it's like steep and then it kind of curves off and it feels like it gets steeper. Like it just continues to get steeper and steeper, right? And it's like curving off, as you can see here. It kind of like curves and then you go and there's like a roundabout at the very top, but it's one of those that like you get past that steep curve and you think you're kind of through it, but then it just like slowly tapers, but it's still going. Like it kind of just keeps going. Even when you feel like it should be done, it's not. And it just keeps going and going. And then there's a medical staff, like there's a medical tent, there's a bunch of medical staff and there's some porta potties at the top. I was absolutely destroyed by the top of this hill and was like, I don't know how I'm gonna keep going. I still got, 2 miles to go basically. But you reach the top, you go around the like right-hand side of the roundabout, the medical team's up there cheering for you. And then you go and you come back out onto Cohen. Ben caught me here. So I'd gotten a little ahead of Ben through here, but I really lost my pace through the hill. Ben caught me. And like I said, you turn right and there's a water station right there. So we started chatting again. And then we slowly closed the gap on that red shirt runner. And so then right here is where Ben kind of warned me. He said like, hey, I know that hill was rough, but actually the worst hill is coming. And that's the hill on Cohen, that overpass. And as you can see, my pace drastically dropped again. And it's basically because when you do Hospital Hill, your legs are just shot. Right? And then you come and you don't really get any reprieve from Hospital Hill. It's still more uphill. Like you don't get it. You get this like tiny downhill that I'm so tired I don't even feel it. And then you get another like not big hill, but big hill. It feels huge when you're dying. But Ben had told me once you get to the top of this, it was like right up in here. Ben was like, okay, once you get to the top of this, you can drop it. It's all good from here. And I told him, I said, Ben, I don't know if I have it. And Ben said, yeah, if you're still talking, you've got it. And I said, oh, it's not the aerobic capacity, it's the legs. And he said, I get it. But honestly, that was the main thing I needed to help me be able to get the PR that I did, was that Ben telling me that if I could still talk, that I had it, was kind of that like mental switch I needed to remind myself that like, yeah, I've done hard things before and I've come this far and I've run a really hard race so far. So like, why give up just because a few hills got me tired? And so as soon as we got the top here, I went as hard as I could, which as you can see like the pace change. So like 7:35 to 6:22. And then I just dropped the hammer down into the fives. Like I was going as hard as I could. And like I said, for as much as I could. You go back through the fire truck and it was here too. This is where you hit the 20K right before you go back under the fire truck with the big flag. And there's a little bit, that's where the crowd support actually happens, because as you make the turn, there's the gated area, like the fenced off area for the finish line. And that's where all the family members and people are waiting. At that point, like I said, I had really turned it on and was pushing. And then the person who was kind of tracking the 20K mat also just was like, you've got this, push it, go. And I don't know if it was the fact that there was just no crowd support throughout. And then all of a sudden having like that kind of like affirmation from certain people like Ben and then the person with the 20K mat, like it was just enough to kind of keep me mentally locked in to where like I'm as fatigued as I've ever been. And those hills really took out my legs. So that was really more than the aerobic capacity. It was really just that my legs felt so heavy and dead. Like I said, it was just enough to keep me going. And then I made the right-hand turn and I hit mile 13. And that's where like I knew I just had to drop it as hard as possible. You like make the turn right here. And so as you're making the turn, I could then see the clock. And I saw that the clock said 1:22:45. And I realized like, okay, I need to like sprint. And so I'm just sprinting all out. I started to get like tunnel vision because, I'm just so focused on that. And I'm running as hard as I can. Like, as you can see, a 4:24, like I'm just dropping it as much as I could. And it felt like the seconds were moving so fast towards the 1:23, but I wasn't moving any faster towards the finish line. But luckily I went through, I saw the clock at 1:22:50, but I'm assuming based on the official time, I hit it at 1:22:56 and was able to get the sub 1:23 PR for the historic half. And honestly, I could not be happier about my performance for this race. I placed 14th overall, if I remember correctly, and then I took 3rd overall for my age group. So again, that goal I had set of shifting from a PR to just trying to place in my age group as well as place in the top 20. I was able to do both and still get the PR, which just felt amazing. This is just one of those races that honestly, I think I will always remember because of how difficult it was. I think it was the race I needed to help me realize that as a runner and as a newer runner who's only been running for a few years and really hasn't been racing at all, that you can do really hard things and you really can push yourself beyond where you think you can. Your mind and your body will want to give up way sooner than what you're actually capable of, and you just need to be able to lock back in and focus on moments like these, like this race, to say, no, I've done this before and I can do it again. So this race was one of those that I loved it and I hated it all at the same time. It was an amazing race. The Marine Corps Marathon Organization has put on great races so far between the 17.75K and the historic half. Like I said, if you're looking at running the historic half or any of the Marine Corps Marathon Organization races, I highly recommend it. They're extremely fun. You're gonna run a hard race, but you won't be disappointed. So that's my race recap of the Marine Corps historic half, a course overview, as well as going through how I got my PR in the half marathon distance. I'm really excited to start training for the Marine Corps full marathon in October with the attempt at doing a sub 3 in the full marathon.